So just a quick review of what you're up to, what you're going to face when you're doing this Cambridge examination. Even if you're doing Edexcel, it's a lot of the content would be pretty similar, and I can go over that with you separately. It's so starting with the number of exams. Maybe I can just write it over here. You in total, TK, if you're giving CAE A levels, it's going to be 5 exams. It's going to be P1, P2. You've got your paper 2, you've got your paper 3, and you have a P4 exam and a P5 exam. Now in AS, these are the ones that you would probably be giving in your AS. If you're not doing composite exams, that's your AS. And the other two are your A2 exams. Or those are the ones that you're going to give in your second year. Combined, that's A levels. So the first paper, the first one, those are your MCQs. They are 40 marks, and that's you have 1 hour for that. So the first one, the first exam that you, it's not probably the first exam that you're going to give. The first exam is usually the paper 2 when you give your exams. But I mean, the first 3 would be together. Like in early May, you'll probably be giving these 2 exams, and then in June you'll be giving this P1 exam. As anyways, MCQs are really hard, really difficult. Out of all the papers that you're going to give, the first one, the MCQs, is probably going to be, it doesn't carry that much weight. If there is weightage given somewhere, if we can, TK, this one is a news. Let's just quickly going through if there is, it's probably going to be somewhere between 10, 14%, 15%. No, not this. So just a second. Let me just quickly find if there is. As it's given over here. So it's around 15%, 15.5%. I mean, if you combine everything, that's 15.5%. So that's given over here. 15.5%. So out of the 100%, it's not that much of it doesn't play that big of a role. But this one is difficult. Not only is this difficult, you have time issues with this one. So there is a time challenge as well, that you have to do things very, very quickly. You're always running out of time. The second one, that's your paper 2. That's your normal structured. Those are your normal structured questions. So those are your normal structured questions. 60 marks, and it's normally 1 hour 15 minutes. And we can have a look at the weightage that this would carry. That would be approximately 23% out of the entire syllabus. So 23%. So in AS, it's considerably more. Like if you isolate AS, in AS, that's like half of it. Like MCQs is 31% in AS. Paper 2 is 46%. So half of the grade would in your AS, that would depend on your paper 2. So paper 2 carries a lot more weight, especially in AS. Overall, it's 23%, but in AS only, I mean, if you're talking about this grade only, that's 46%. So almost half. This one is not as difficult as the P1. Usually more straightforward. I mean, they're pretty straightforward questions, not that tricky questions. MCQ questions are kind of slightly more challenging. So I wouldn't say that this is a very difficult or challenging paper as compared to P1. So you've got straightforward questions. A lot of the questions are kind of repetitive. I mean, if you do past paper practice, a lot of the questions are going to be very similar. They follow the same pattern. In MCQs, you usually get very different types of problems, and they're stated always differently. So there's not that much of a repetition that's happening in MCQs. There's no set pattern that's being followed in MCQs. But most of the questions in paper two, like if you're attempting questions on a particular topic, they would be pretty. There's a set pattern that they would mostly be following. Uh, Time is not that much of an issue. You just have to do almost 4 or 5 questions. Time is not as much of an issue as in P1. And speaking in a relative sense, so this one is much more straightforward. There's one difference between P1 and P2, which makes P1 actually kind of easier compared to P2. There's only one factor that favors P1, and that is that in P1, you don't actually have to show your working. It doesn't really matter how you get your answers, as long as you get your answer. If the answer is A, I mean, and you mark A, you score a mark for that. In P2, the tough or the challenging part is that you have to focus on stating your answers well. So you have to focus on what type of terms should you use in your answers. I mean, but a lot of people are very bad with it. I mean, they would be good with answering the questions. They would know what the answer is, but they wouldn't really know how to actually properly state their answers. They'll have the concept, but they just can't write properly when they are trying to attempt this. So in MCQs, that's not the issue. In MCQs, you do terrible working. I mean, you can do as untidy a working as you want. As long as the answer is correct, that's fine. I mean, no one really cares about the working, but over here you have to present your answers properly. Remember, in science, your answers have to be brief and to the point. I mean, they have to be scientific. They should sound scientific, and they should be using scientific terms as well. So you can't really state things in your own words. This is not an English essay that's going on. You can write the answer in points, but they have to be very direct. It has to be like, if what's being asked, you just have to answer it in the best possible way, and using the best possible scientific terms that you know of. Finally, you have TK. Is this clear?
Yes.
And you also have to kind of interpret what exactly is the answer wanting you to state. For example, I mean, this one is the 2022 syllabus, so I'm not really, I mean, the syllabus hasn't really changed much, except for that the structure is kind of, I mean, they've just kind of redone the whole layout. There used to be, there definitely used to be a place where there was a guide on how to state answers. So I'll just quickly go over this if I can. So just 1 second. I can open the old one. Just 1 second. This. So just 1 second. It used to be somewhere over here. Maybe they've taken that out. That's the data booklet. Forget this. I mean, they've taken this out in this new syllabus. Just a second. Anyways, it was just a helpful guide of for you to understand. I'll send you a screenshot of that. It was just a helpful guide of what do the words in the questions mean. Like if they use the word define, what does that mean? If they use the word state and explain, what does that mean? If they use the word evaluate, what does that mean? So there was this key given, which was describing what the question was looking for and how much detail has to be given. Anyways, but that's something that people have to work on when they're doing paper 2, that they need to learn how to state their answers properly, and they have to be brief and they have to be scientific. And so this is something that they have to work with P2. Most people lose marks because of this. They know how to solve questions, but they just don't practice. They don't practice writing answers, which is why their answers are always a lot of times written very, very poorly, and they end up losing marks in P2. And remember, it carries a lot more weightage in your AS. So this will matter if you don't learn how to state your answers properly, and you don't practice. I mean, remember, the only way you can learn is if you practice. A lot of people know how to solve answers, or they don't really properly, even when they're practicing, they don't learn how to show the working. Like a lot of people, if they're solving a moles question, they will get the answer, but how would you write the answer properly in steps, and so that the examiner would be able to see your working? So people should learn how to state their answers properly. As anyway, so moving to P3, you've got your P3 exam, and that's your practicals. So practicals is there's nothing conceptually, there's nothing new. It's the same O levels. Most of the practicals are the same as in O levels. In O levels, you didn't actually, a lot of people, I mean, most people don't do practicals. They attempt ATPs, but you see a lot of questions in moles where different experiments are going on, like titration and excess method and salt analysis. So you do come across all these things. Over here in A levels, you're going to come across the exact same experiments, except that you will be performing them. So so when you're performing practicals and when you're attempting a practical paper, roughly that could be divided into 3 things. I mean, they expect you to follow instructions properly. They expect you to, they'll give you marks for calculating or measuring the data properly. And then the last 1/3 is probably just evaluation. Like, what do you do with the data? Do you make a graph? Is there a moles question after that? So the practical has 3 parts. One is you're able to follow the instructions, whatever he's saying. Like if he says you fill the burette with FA1 or with any solution, I mean, at least you should be able to know what a burette is. Now, so 2/3 of the paper in practicals is all about learning how to use the apparatus. That's it. 1/3 is about evaluation. So 2/3 is how do you collect the data? How do you perform the experiments? Every instruction it's probably going to be given in the practicals. The only problem is people don't get practice for this, and they miss out on their practicals, especially in schools. So it's very important that practicals are performed by hand. Even if you see someone doing a practical, it's not that good a learning experience, because the thing is that that you should be able to do your practicals without thinking much. Like if they're telling you to fill a burette, and it's not that big of an issue. But if you have never done that before, if you've just done it once, people will have trouble simply handling a burette. Like a burette is a very thin device, and it's kind of, you have to be gentle when you're trying to fill it up. But if you've never actually done it before, or you've done it once and you just saw other people because you thought it was so easy, then your motor skills won't develop, and you will have a hard time when you just show up at the exam and you try to just do the simple stuff. It's like riding a bicycle. Like, I mean, everyone knows how to ride a bicycle, but if you've never ridden a bicycle, you'll have trouble. I mean, it has to be involuntary. Like most of the instructions that are given in the practical, you don't have to think. Like you pick a burette, you pick a test tube. I mean, how to turn on the Bunsen burner. These are things for which your motor skills should be ready. And that, I mean, you can only light up a Bunsen burner very quickly if you've done it like 7-8 times or 10-20 times before that. If you're doing it for the first time, you'll have trouble. I mean, even though it's not that big of an issue, but you will struggle with just the simple stuff as well. So make sure get practice. The practicals are not that difficult, but it's very important that you get practice. You know how to handle your hands, at least know how to handle apparatus, because that's going to be very vital. And then you've got your P4, that's an A2. P4 is a big paper. That's like almost half of A levels, around 40%. So if you go to P4, it's like a structured paper, which you're going to give in your A2. So the percentages were given somewhere here. So this is your P4. It's almost 38.5% of the entire A levels. So that's like 40%. Like, I mean, your entire, all the other papers aside, that's 60%. This single paper is almost 40%. So that's one big paper, P4. And it's a 2-hour paper. It's a lengthy paper. You'll give that in your A2. That's 38.5%. It's also structured. This is a 2-hour paper, and then you have a P5. That's a tiny paper at the end. That's just 30-mark paper. I think around 9% must be given over here. 11.5%, sorry. So it's around 11.5%, 30 marks. So that's the weightage. I mean, this one is 100 marks. And this one over here is just 30 marks. That's like an ATP, but we'll discuss P5 later. That's also not that difficult, except P4 is the big one. In AS, P2 is the big one. Both of them are structured papers. So that's the division of the exams. We'll be focusing on the first three, P1, P2, and P3 in the first year. Yes.
This is for Cambridge, right?
Yes, this is for Cambridge, right?
So for what will it be for Edexcel?
Yeah, I'll tell you about Edexcel later.
Okay.
Send me the code as well, right? Because there are a couple of codes for Edexcel depending on the variants. So we'll talk about that later, okay?
Okay.
As anyways, I'll move to the syllabus, which is the syllabus is kind of the same for both.
Oh.
So now the syllabus is now the syllabus has three components. It's got physical chemistry. It's got inorganic, and finally it's going to have organic chemistry. Now, the physical part is, I mean, the syllabus is divided into the topics are divided. The physical part that's more conceptual, that's more mathematical, requires calculations. So that's your physical part. What is involved in physical is that you've got different topics. The first one is, let's say it's the first one is moles. It's pretty much the same as O levels, except that the questions are going to be slightly more difficult. Then you've got your atomic structure and chemical bonding. These topics would be kind of very detailed. It will not exactly be a continuation of your O levels atomic structure and chemical bonding, because A level atomic structure and chemical bonding is kind of a lot more detailed. So it's going to sound very different from your O levels atomic structure and chemical bonding. So O levels was very basic, and this one kind of has nothing to do with O levels. It's like, I mean, the whole model of an atom is kind of very detailed and very different. Same goes for chemical bonding as well. So these two topics are kind of really lengthy. So I'm just going to cross out those things. which you've already studied. We'll do them, but these are things that you've already studied in a lot of detail. So we'll be practicing a lot of questions with moles. But atomic structure and chemical bonding would be kind of things that they're the kind of things that would be very new to you. Similarly, you've got after that it's energetics. Energetics is again not exactly, I mean, it's like this one would seem like a continuation, except that it would be more calculation based. Like in O levels, you just did endothermic, exothermic, but now it's going to be involving a lot of calculations. Most of them would be kind of easy, except one or two areas where things would become difficult. Then you've got equilibria. Again, it's going to be a continuation of your O levels equilibria, where the equilibrium would shift forward or backward. But again, it would involve a lot of calculations. So if equilibrium is shifting forward, you would have to tell them by what amount, how many moles are getting produced of the products. So it's going to involve a lot of calculations as well. So that's physical chemistry. The other things that you will study in physical chemistry are redox reaction. There's electrochemistry. Now, most of electrochemistry is in A2. In AS, you'll study redox reactions, which you have already done, actually. So I'm going to just cross it out for AS because, I mean, we will study redox reactions. There'll be some things would be new, but most of it would be kind of the same as O levels, oxidation states, oxidizing agents, reducing agents. Most of the topics in electrochemistry are actually part of A2. The same goes for rate of reaction or reaction kinetics. That one is also kind of belonging to A2 instead of AS. Rate of reaction. So in AS, you will be doing this, but very little. Most of the stuff you will be doing that's the same as your O levels rate of reaction.
Yes.
Then there's another topic that's called states of matter, and you've already done that in O levels as well. In O levels physics, that's about Charles' law, Boyle's law, like pressure is inversely proportional to volume. So it's all about gases. But most of the stuff you've actually covered in O levels physics. So this one is also not that difficult. It's so mostly in physical chemistry, when you're studying AS, it's just these four topics that would be completely new. The other ones, moles, I mean, the other topics we will be studying, but they would be very similar to what you have already done. So that those will not be that challenging. Then you've got inorganic. Now, in inorganic, what you have is in inorganic chemistry, what you have is it's mostly memorizing stuff. So it's mostly data and facts that you just have to remember. Who has a higher melting point, who has a lower melting point, what are the colors, what happens when you add something to water, what is the solubility like. So it's mostly about memorizing facts. So this one is less conceptual and more about memorization. There would be something that would be conceptual, but most of it is just memorizing data and facts. Over here, you'll study group 2. You'll study period 3. You'll study group 17, which is halogens. And you'll study nitrogen and sulfur. So these will be studied in inorganic. So there's not much to study except for I'll just go through the data and facts. There's just a 5-6 page sheets I've prepared notes for this. We'll just go over them. Like if it's halogens, we'll just learn what the colors are, what happens to the melting points, do they become good oxidizing agents down the group or reducing agents down the group? So do they like to gain electrons or lose electrons? So all those facts. So they're written down in 3-4 pages, and we'll just go over them. So it's more about just memorizing those data and facts. The last one is going to be organic. And in organic chemistry, a lot of the stuff would be very similar, but a lot more detailed. For example, we'll start with naming. So you have learned naming organic compounds in O levels, but you only learned very simple compounds like up till 4 carbon atoms. So it wasn't that detailed. So now the thing is that when you're trying to name things over here, it's going to be a lot more complicated. It's going to have things would have branches. They would have multiple functional groups. So you'll be doing the same thing in O levels as well, but in O levels things were simple. Now it's going to be a lot more complicated. Similarly, you'll be studying isomers, which you have already done in O levels as well. But over here, you'll learn about other types of isomers. There would be many different types, and there would be stereoisomers which you haven't studied in O levels at all. So more detailed, but the same stuff. About functional groups, you'll study about alkanes, and the reactions would be kind of the same. Like in alkanes, you studied this, except that the reaction, for example, if I can find the equation, it's this is chlorination of alkanes. Let me just this one. So this is like normal chlorination of alkanes. There's a CH4, and this is bromination. And the bromine substitutes and HBr is formed. Cl comes in, substitutes a hydrogen, and HCl is formed. So this is under UV light. So these are some reactions that you already did. But these reactions you learn don't happen in one step. They happen something like this, that there are multiple steps which are involved when those reactions take place. They don't happen in one go. What happens first is there would be one thing going on. For example, this thing over here is kind of showing that a chlorine atom would be stealing the H atom. So there would be multiple steps involved. So what you'll be doing is you'll be studying the same reactions that you did in O levels, except you'll be studying how those reactions happen stepwise. Like, what did UV light do for the reaction to take place? Why was UV light involved in it? So a lot more detail would be involved. Same goes for alkenes. In alkenes, you'll have a bit more reactions. You'll be studying the same bromination, addition polymers, hydrogenation, hydration, but there would be some extra reactions like oxidation of alkenes, which you hadn't studied in O levels. You'll study that as well. And again, the reactions would be a lot more detailed, like bromination reaction. Why does it happen? What happens with bromine so that bromine gets added to an alkene?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
We have to leave. We'll connect from phone, so you can accept.
Nee, I didn't get you. What are you saying?
We have to leave somewhere, so we'll join from phone.
I'll just probably end in 5 minutes. Okay. This would be just the orientation. Okay. So just you can connect. Please do connect. As anyway, so I'll just sum up organic quickly, and then I'll talk about a few more things after that. So you've got alcohols, again, more detail, similar types of reactions that you studied in O levels, except we'll dive deeper into those reactions. Carboxylic acids. You've got some new types of organic compounds. There would be aldehydes and ketones. Which you did not study. You will be studying about nitriles, again, which you did not study. There would be topics on halogenoalkanes, which you did kind of study, but not as a topic, separate topic, like chloroalkanes. So kind of the same, but it's going to be a lot more detailed. This part, the organic chemistry part, is kind of conceptual. I mean, this is generally considered to be the tough part because it's conceptual as well as requires a fair bit of memorization as well. Like you need to remember the reaction conditions, but there are a lot of concepts as well, and requires a lot of understanding as well. So this one is just purely memorization, mostly memorization. This is mostly conceptual, but this involves both. It involves concepts. It involves like isomers, how to make isomers. That is conceptual, but it requires a fair bit of memorization about the reactions. What are the conditions of the reactions? So it requires a fair bit of memorization as well. The last thing I'm going to talk about is so the very last thing that I'm going to talk about is this thing that when you attempt A levels, the biggest challenge is going to be the questions and the difficulty level of those questions. So when you're attempting a question, two things are required when you're trying to solve a question. One of them, it requires two things. One of those two things is your knowledge and your concepts. I mean, that part is challenging, but people are able to actually, like, if you study hard, you'll get your concepts. I mean, you'll know stuff. You'll learn how to. I mean, you learn. I mean, if you're talking about isomers, stereoisomers, you learn about it. So, and if you study hard, you'll get your concepts right. But that is not just the only sufficient thing that's required for answering the questions, because the problem now is that the questions are not going to be very straightforward. So it would require a fair bit of comprehension as well, and a fair bit of problem solving skills. But specifically comprehension, you would have to understand what the question is looking for, or you would have to understand how to use the data that's given in the question to figure out the answer. The knowledge is important, the concepts are important, but if you're not able to apply those knowledge and concepts properly, if you fail to understand what the question is looking for, even if it's a moles question, you're not able to figure out. I mean, even if you know how to solve moles questions, how to use formulas, all the concepts are clear, but if you're not able to extract the proper data out of the question and sort of manipulate the data properly and comprehend the question properly, you would not be able to solve the question. So comprehension skills, I mean, I would say that almost 50, let's say 40%. 40% of the task when you're trying to solve a question is you trying to understand the question properly. 60%, the rest of the 60% would be your concepts and knowledge. I mean, without the concepts and the knowledge, you wouldn't be able to answer the question in the first place. But even if you have the knowledge and the concepts, if you don't develop, I mean, remember, these skills have to be developed. The comprehension skills, they need to be developed. Initially, you'll face a lot of difficulty when you're trying to solve questions, but there has to be a learning curve. You should be able to, if you attempt 10 questions initially, then out of the 10 questions, maybe you will not be able to figure out 5 questions. I mean, remember, the questions would be phrased very difficult. I mean, most questions would have terrible phrasing. I mean, they would try to confuse you. They would try to trick you as well. Some of the ways in which they would try to trick you would be kind of very basic. I mean, this is the same thing that would happen in SATs and GREs when you give your exams, university entrance exams as well. They would be tricky questions. They would try to make you or try to I mean, they won't be helping you when they present the data. They'll try and present the data in the most confusing way as possible. So comprehension can only be developed if you practice a lot. But during that practice, you would need a lot of help as well. So make sure learn to ask questions. Make sure if you attempt 10 questions and you're not able to answer 5 of them, then believe me, that's normal. But what you should do after that is somehow get help, ask your teacher questions, get those 5 answers, and try and understand those. I mean, that's how, if you keep on struggling with those questions, then you'll be able to figure out how to solve those questions. You'll develop a habit. You'll develop the skill of comprehending questions properly, because there's only a limited number of ways in which questions can be asked. So you have to kind of get this comprehension skill really right. And that can only happen if you continuously chase those questions, attempt questions, try and attempt as many questions as possible. If you don't understand 5 of them, try and figure out, ask somebody, always seek help, always seek help. And there are 2 ways of seeking help. One is, I mean, remember, you would have to, in this case, in O-levels, you don't really have to actually ask somebody a lot, because most of the questions are straightforward. But in A-levels, you would have to ask for help whenever you get stuck. Whenever you get stuck, don't sit at home, don't browse the internet. I mean, it's very easy to send me a WhatsApp message or anyone a WhatsApp message. Ask for help, how to solve this question. I mean, you have to develop this habit. Constantly keep asking questions whenever you get stuck, because the trick is just not to, I mean, don't get stuck for too long on something. Get it out of your mind, or get it out of the way as quickly as possible. And the quickest possible way is just take a phone, take a picture of the thing that you're stuck at, send it to someone, and you'll probably get an answer. Browsing the internet is probably going to be a huge waste of time. I mean, there's so much data on the internet that a lot of times it turns out, I mean, your search turns into a colossal waste of time. So the quickest possible way is get your teacher on WhatsApp and just ask him the question. But you have to practice a lot, practice. So, and initially, unlike O-levels, if you attempt a worksheet, maybe you'll get 8 questions right out of 10. But in A-levels, you will always be struggling with questions. You'll probably not struggle that much with the knowledge and the concepts, but with the questions, you will struggle. And trust me, the thresholds are always also lower. I mean, it's normal if you're struggling with questions. Even the brightest students are struggling with the questions. The threshold for A grades are also lower accordingly, because the questions are difficult and most of the people are struggling with those questions. So remember, make it a habit, learn to struggle with those questions and learn to get them out of the way. If you're stuck on them, try to figure out how to get to the solution of that question as quickly as possible. TK. Any questions about this? Is this clear?
Yep.
So is this clear? Mars, clear?
Yeah.
जी sir.
Let's continue then. This was just an orientation class. TK will start with basics equations in the next class. I've just given you a quick orientation, TK. And Murza, if you can send me the Edexcel code, the syllabus code, the one that you are attempting, TK. And then we can talk about it. So TK, everyone take care. Let's continue next time then.
Yes.
Okay. Take care, Allah Hafiz.
Okay sir, Allah Hafiz.